What happens when a calm, brilliant black woman boards a plane and is told her first-class seat doesn't belong to her? What if she doesn't raise her voice? What if she doesn't argue or scream? What if she just moves? Would the world notice? Would anything change? Or, what if that quiet woman was also the CEO behind a secret AI protocol watching everything? And what if, after that moment of injustice, she made one phone call and within 72 hours, 3 major airlines were grounded? This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about dignity, about systems built to look the other way, and the quiet woman who refused to disappear. Her name is Dr. Naomi Prescott, and the seat they took from her became the spark that forced an entire industry to finally look in the mirror. So, are you ready to find out what happens when power meets purpose and silence speaks louder than rage? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because this is the beginning of a story you won't forget. Now, let's begin. It was supposed to be an ordinary boarding call. Gate B-19 at Redwood International buzzed with the usual low hum of pre-flight anticipation. Carry-ons wheeled, boarding groups shifted. And in the quiet corner near the service desk, Dr. Naomi Prescott stood calm, passport in hand, boarding pass on screen, first class, seat 2A. The gate agent scanned her ID, smiled politely. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Prescott. You're good to go." She nodded gently, her tone measured. "Thank you. No fuss, no fanfare. Just a woman traveling for business." As she stepped onto the jet bridge, the artificial chill of cabin air rushed forward. Naomi had always found the first breath where jet fuel met recycled oxygen to be oddly grounding. Something about the hum of the engines, the controlled lighting, the cadence of greetings from the crew made the world feel manageable again. She reached her seat, 2A, and carefully stowed her tote. Inside it, a linen folder, a journal, and a sleek tablet encased in navy leather. She didn't need much. She never did. Just as she settled into the plush seat, buckling her belt and folding her hands, a shadow blocked the aisle. It was the flight attendant. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began, her name tag reading Lena M. "I'm so sorry, but there's been a change." Naomi blinked. "A change?" "Yes. We'll need to reassign you to 14C. Just a slight reshuffling for balance and priority passengers." Naomi didn't move. Her voice remained composed. "I purchased this seat 4 weeks ago. Directly. First class. 2A. Lena shifted awkwardly. "Yes, of course. But we've just had an executive-level flyer join us last minute. Mr. Carter Langford, Platinum Elite. The system flagged the seat for reallocation." Naomi's gaze remained steady. "Are you asking me to move because of a policy, or because of who he is?" The question hung in the air. The flight attendant hesitated, then offered that tight corporate smile. "It's just standard procedure, ma'am. Thank you for your cooperation. No apology, no compensation, no acknowledgement, just policy." Behind Lena, a man stepped into view, white, tailored suit, sleek silver cufflinks, Bluetooth in one ear. Carter Langford. The kind of man who didn't check if he belonged in 2A. He assumed it. Naomi breathed in once. Then she stood. Not because she agreed, not because she accepted it, but because she'd seen this before, and she'd learned that sometimes silence wasn't submission. It was calibration. She took her bag, her grace, and her composure, and walked to row 14C. As she sat, the new seat stiffer, narrower, noisier. A man across the aisle raised an eyebrow. An older gentleman. He glanced at Naomi, then toward the front cabin, lips tight. He didn't say anything. No one did. Phones didn't rise. Nobody gasped. It wasn't dramatic enough. But to Naomi, it wasn't about drama. It was about pattern. She exhaled slowly, pulled out her journal, and didn't write. Not yet, but her mind was already working. Because while the airline thought she was just another black woman quietly moved for convenience, what they didn't know was that she had built the very system that watched for this exact moment. And this time, it was recording. The seat was narrower than she remembered. 14C didn't offer much. No leg rest, no privacy divider. Just a tray table with a coffee stain and a seatback pocket filled with wrinkled magazines. Naomi Prescott sat down slowly, folding her coat across her lap, resting her tote beneath the seat in front of her. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She could still feel the presence of Carter Langford, sipping something chilled in 2A as if the sky owed it to him. A few rows up, someone muttered beneath their breath, something like, "That's not right." But no one said it louder. Across the aisle, a young flight attendant caught Naomi's gaze, hesitated, then quickly looked away. Naomi adjusted her posture. Straight spine, shoulders relaxed. She wasn't trying to make a statement. She was trying to make sense of the old ache curling beneath her ribs. She'd designed systems to flag this very thing. She had run simulations, collected data, created frameworks for ethical transparency. Equiscan wasn't just a project. It was born from years of being reassigned, overlooked, and thanked for her patience like it was part of the service. And yet, here she was again, row 14C. She glanced at the armrest between herself and the window passenger man, with noise-canceling headphones and a forehead sheen of jet lag. He didn't notice her. No one ever really did once you moved back far enough. For a moment, Naomi wondered if she was overreacting. Maybe it really was just a weight balance issue. Maybe Mr. Langford really did have emergency clearance or a medical need. Maybe no. She'd built Equiscan to detect patterns, not possibilities. She reached into her tote and withdrew a second phone sleek, matte black, unbranded. She'd carried it since Phase 3 of the Equiscan rollout. Just in case, she powered it on. It greeted her with a soft green screen. User verified doctor. Naomi Prescott. Equiscan protocol standby. Mode incident flag ready. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the interface. She wasn't angry. She wasn't embarrassed. She was tired. And that's what made her dangerous. Across the cabin, another passenger shifted their weight. The intercom clicked on. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Viajet Flight 418 to New York. We'll be pushing back shortly. Flight time is just under 4 hours." Naomi glanced at the window. It was starting to rain. It always rained on days like this. She tapped her screen. Flag incident. Seat reassignment from 2A to 14C without prior explanation or policy citation. She added a short note. Passenger reassigned for priority protocol involving Carter Langford. Unverified elite status. Interaction lacked transparency. No options given. Then she hit send. The screen pulsed once, then again, and then it went dark. That was all. No alarms, no escalation. Just a system logging what everyone else ignored. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting the engine's hum fill the silence. She could already feel the protocol working. Not in the cabin, but elsewhere. Data was moving. Flight records were syncing. Voice logs were triangulating. The sky hadn't changed yet, but the algorithm had noticed. And soon, someone at headquarters was going to feel it. The engines roared softly as the plane pushed back from the gate. Rain traced lazy trails down the oval window beside Naomi. 14C felt colder now. Maybe it was the air. Maybe it was the memory. She kept her hands clasped loosely, her eyes fixed ahead, her mind flicking through a reel of other flights. Not this one. Not even this decade. 12 years ago. Naomi had boarded a red-eye from Phoenix to Atlanta, dressed in a charcoal gray pantsuit, briefcase in hand, boarding pass clearly marked 2B, and yet she'd found herself sitting in row 18. Why? Because the gate agent whispered to the cabin crew that Dr. Prescott looked a little confused. Confused. She had a Ph.D. in behavioral decision science from Cornell. She had authored 2 federally adopted protocols for equitable systems management. She'd built training simulations used by NASA, but she looked confused. That word had followed her like a ghost. It crept into boardroom pauses, into networking events where she was asked if she was with catering, into promotions where she trained the man who eventually became her boss. And every time she'd stayed quiet, she told herself it was just easier. But easier wasn't the same as fair. Back in the present, Naomi's phone vibrated once in her lap. A silent confirmation. Equiscan log 00921. Flight 418. Anomaly detected. Passenger reassignment trend verified. Triggering passive audit. She stared at the message, then locked the screen. Across the aisle. The same older gentleman from earlier glanced her way again. His expression was unreadable, somewhere between sympathy and suspicion. She offered a polite nod. He returned it, then looked forward again, as if to pretend none of this was happening. That was the real weight of these moments, not the insult itself, but the quiet complicity that surrounded it. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, hearing the slight rattle of the beverage cart behind her. There were conversations happening all over the cabin. Laughter, clinking of ice. The injustice had already passed through the room. No one noticed. No one paused. That's how bias survives. It doesn't need violence. It needs silence. She thought of her mother, a woman who'd raised her while managing 3 jobs, who once got removed from a flight for asking too many questions about a missing reservation. Naomi had been 12, sitting by the terminal window, watching her mother argue with a supervisor who refused to make eye contact. That night, her mother didn't cry. She just looked at her daughter and said, "You want to change this. You don't yell. You build something that makes them explain themselves." Naomi had listened. She had listened for years. And now, Equiscan was listening with her. It didn't raise its voice. It didn't storm cabins. It simply kept receipts. And tonight, Virejet was accumulating more than they realized. As the seatbelt sign dimmed and the plane settled into altitude, Naomi finally reached into her journal and wrote a single line. Still happens, still hurts, still working. Then she turned the page and began writing the outline of the next audit protocol. 35 minutes into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft glow. The seatbelt sign blinked off. Dr. Naomi Prescott remained motionless, hands folded loosely atop her journal. She hadn't ordered anything from the cart, didn't need the wine or the coffee. She had something stronger: silence, precision, and the kind of leverage no crew member could see coming. Somewhere inside the secured back end of Equiscan, her report had triggered a chain, not an alert, not a fire drill, a protocol. Status Level 2, passenger flag, pattern detection. Confirmed matching records. 3 prior seat reassignments in the past 10 days. Crew involved Lena M. Flagged in 2 of 3 previous anomalies. Passenger demographic female, African American, age 35-65. Match confidence. 91.4% action initiate. Quiet compliance sync. Virejet system. Tier A. 1 quart. Was. Far below, in Virejet's operations hub in Chicago, a compliance analyst named Kendra Flores watched a new red tile blink onto her live dashboard. Her screen shimmered with live routing maps and behavioral metadata. Normally, she muted anomaly, pings. Most were low-priority triggers, luggage delays, long call holds, seat swaps during boarding. But this tile, it carried a label she hadn't seen before. Equiscan L2 ethically flagged reassignment, Flight 418. She frowned, clicked twice. Her browser opened a secure tab. Passenger Naomi Prescott, Seat 2A, 14C Reason Priority Protocol. Flight Attendant Lena M. Replacement passenger Carter Langford, non-ticketed upgrade. 0 fare logged. Kendra's eyes widened slightly. No fare, she whispered. She pulled up Langford's file. Investor. Frequent flyer. Yes. But no booking for this flight. No upgrade code scanned. Who put him in that seat? Back on the plane, Naomi sat calmly as the beverage cart passed. Lena didn't make eye contact. Naomi didn't need her to. A soft vibration pulsed beneath her palm. She lifted the Equiscan device slightly. System sync initiated. FOIA compliance terminal alerted, monitoring behavior variants across all Virejet Tier 1 crews. She took a breath and finally smiled barely, but meaningfully. Across the country, in a windowless room in Kennedy Slate Airport's Ethics Review Center, a man named Ethan Ung was settling into his shift. He sipped burnt coffee, tapped his monitor awake, and blinked at the flash on screen. Equiscan Cross Airline Flag Flight 418, Virejet, en route ethically questionable reassignment. Passenger Dr. Naomi Prescott monitoring initiated via federal pilot program. He sat up straighter. Here we go, he murmured. At 38,000 feet, Naomi checked her watch. She wasn't tracking time. She was tracking consequence. The system didn't send apologies. It didn't escalate to headlines. It escalated to infrastructure. Carter Langford was reclined comfortably in 2A. His champagne now empty, fingers scrolling his phone. He didn't know that someone had just flagged his name in an internal compliance log. Didn't know that 3 of his prior upgrades had already raised quiet questions. Didn't know that Equiscan had quietly pulled voice logs from gate cameras, syncing patterns in language used when passengers like Naomi were shifted, and didn't know that by the time this flight landed, the airline would no longer be the one in control. In seat 14C, Naomi folded her journal closed and rested her head gently against the seat back. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't filed a complaint, hadn't demanded anything. She had simply pressed a button, and the system had started watching itself. Outside the aircraft, the sky was peaceful. Above the clouds, nothing looked wrong. Inside, Dr. Naomi Prescott sat with her eyes closed, but her mind was anything but still. The hum of the engines soothed other passengers, but for her, it was just another layer of noise she had learned to listen beyond. Because beneath the silence, something had already shifted. In Virejet's Chicago Operations Center, Kendra Flores leaned in closer to her screen. The metadata behind Flight 418 was troubling. 3 hours before takeoff, Carter Langford wasn't even on the manifest. His name had been added manually by someone on the corporate relations team, bypassing standard ticketing protocols. Guest of the CEO. The annotation read, Ensure priority boarding, seat preference. And somehow, the guest now sat in 2A. Kendra's cursor hovered over the override entry. Who authorized this? She opened the Equiscan overlay again. System prediction confidence. 94.7% pattern detected. Preferential reassignment of paid black female passengers. Crew involved Lena M. 3 matches. Passenger doctor. Naomi Prescott, level 1, ethics watch list. Wait, Prescott. Kendra's heart stilled. She had read that name before. In a 34-page policy white paper on AI-led bias mitigation, in a Department of Transportation roundtable summary on ethics enforcement, in the signature block of Equiscan's original patent application, Dr. Naomi Prescott, founder and chief architect, Equiscan protocol. "Oh," Kendra whispered, "you messed with the wrong passenger." At Kennedy Slate Airport, Ethan Ung was already rerouting his shift priorities. He'd pushed Flight 418 to the top of the live ethics watchboard. Each second, new data poured in. Passenger demographics, gate audio transcripts, reassignment trends linked to crew and routing. Voice tone analysis. It was subtle, but consistent. Black passengers, women. Reassigned with soft phrases like "thank you for understanding," or "we had to shift things around." Always for someone else. Always in silence. Ethan flagged the crew roster for post-landing review. Request live review upon arrival. Notify FAA liaison and Port Authority observers. Target crew member Lena M. Subject passenger Prescott. Naomi. Why no. In seat 14C. Naomi opened her eyes slowly. Across the aisle. The man who had been watching her earlier now pretended not to look. But he had seen it. He had seen the way Carter Langford was escorted to 2A like royalty, while she was quietly removed without question. And he had done nothing. She didn't blame him. This was the system. It trained people not to interfere, to let protocol do the damage, to trust that someone else would address it. Only now, someone else was her. And she had written the code that wouldn't just track this moment. It would tie it to every other like it. Back at Virejet headquarters, an internal alert was sent. Subject urgent Flight 418. Flagged by Equiscan, all departments review. Passenger reallocation metrics for past 14 days. Compliance Department. Begin triage level analysis. CEO's office. Stand by for brief. Still at 38,000 feet, Naomi finally opened her tablet. She scrolled through the Equiscan dashboard in passive mode. At the top, a blinking banner now read, Live Case Tracking. Flight 418, Active Behavioral Ethics Flag. Tier 1, Cross-Reference Activity, 12 flights, 4 airports, 3 crew. Status escalation pending. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady. This wasn't vengeance. It was verification. It was the difference between being told, "You're overreacting," and having the system say, "We have the receipts," because the truth, flight data doesn't lie. And by the time Flight 418 touched down in New York, Virejet wouldn't be able to, either. The seatbelt sign blinked on again. Descent into Kennedy Slate International had begun. Outside, the plane pierced layers of cloud, the world below flickering in clusters of gold and steel. Inside, Dr. Naomi Prescott sat motionless in 14C, one hand resting on the closed cover of her tablet. She wasn't watching the landing sequence. She was watching the system respond. At Virejet HQ, The conference room just off the executive wing was silent except for the sound of fingers tapping on glass and screens flickering to life. "Tell me this isn't what it looks like," said Jillian Rudd, Director of Corporate Compliance. Her voice was low, clipped, barely hiding the heat beneath her polished tone. Across from her, Martin Kell, VP of Operations, was already sweating. Tu didn't know she was on that flight. Jillian narrowed her eyes. "You didn't know Naomi Prescott, the woman who built Equiscan, was the passenger your team just bumped for a zero-fare VIP guest." Martin fumbled, but it was a special case. Langford's firm. "She flagged your entire flight with a Tier 1 ethics alert. Do you have any idea what happens when that audit hits our investor channels?" Martin opened his mouth, then closed it again. Jillian turned to the screen. A live copy of the passenger manifest for Flight 418 was up. She pointed to the override field beside Seat 2A. Manual. No code. No authorization trail. Just insert Langford. "Carter, executive guest. There are 3 ethics violations on this page alone," she said. Martin's phone vibrated violently on the table. He checked it, then went pale. "FAA Ethics Liaison has requested a post-landing debrief at JFK. Equiscan agent will be on site." Back on the aircraft, the flight crew moved down the aisle, preparing for landing. Naomi watched as Lena M. passed by without a word, not even a glance. But others were starting to glance. The man across the aisle, a woman 2 rows up, a quiet murmur. Someone had seen the screen when Naomi opened her tablet. Someone else had overheard Lena's earlier explanation. And one passenger, a middle-aged woman in 13A, had just pulled out her phone to search something called Equiscan. The silence was thinning. That was the thing about systems once they became visible. They demanded to be explained. At Kennedy Slate Airport, Ethan Ung had moved from observation to activation. He stood in the staff area just beyond Gate 7 adjusting his lanyard, checking his notes. He wasn't alone. With him were 2 others, both in plain clothes, both with Department of Transportation badges discreetly clipped inside their blazers. They weren't there to make a scene. They were there to observe how the airline handled itself. Because if there's one thing Equiscan had proven over time, it was this bias doesn't live in announcements. It lives in decisions that are never explained. The cabin began to descend. Naomi looked down at her journal and wrote 3 simple words. "They're watching now." The flight landed softly. No drama. No turbulence, just an unremarkable touchdown on runway 4. And yet, nothing about what was coming next would be gentle. In the gate area, a quiet buzz of internal messages flew through Virejet's devices. 2 customer service managers stood just outside the jet bridge, eyes flicking toward each other nervously. "Should we greet her?" one whispered. "Who, Langford?" "No." "Her." A beat of silence. Then the gate agent nodded slowly. And behind the sliding cabin door, the seatbelt sign clicked off, and Naomi Prescott rose. The cabin door opened with a soft hiss. Fresh airport air mingled with the stale scent of recycled cabin pressure. "Doctor!" Naomi Prescott stepped forward calmly, her tote over one shoulder, journal in hand. There were no flashing lights, no announcements, no apologies, just a quiet pause. A gate agent in a burgundy blazer, early 30s, eyes sharp but nervous, stepped into her path. "Dr. Prescott," she asked, voice carefully neutral. "Yes, we have someone who'd like a word with you. This way. Please." Naomi didn't resist. She simply nodded and followed. Behind her, A dozen passengers disembarked, each passing the scene with darting eyes. None stopped, but a few whispered. The man from 14D turned to the woman beside him. "She's the one they moved, right?" The woman nodded, frowning. "From first class." I heard the attendant say, "Thank you for understanding." And then, 2 rows behind them, a teen girl pulled out her phone and typed quickly into Google, "Naomi Prescott Airline Protocol Incident NYC." She hit enter, and her eyes widened. By the time Naomi reached the discreet consultation room off the concourse, FAA Ethics Officer Ethan Ung was already seated at a corner table, badge visible but not flaunted. He rose, offered a hand. "Thank you for making time," he said. "I didn't," Naomi replied softly. "But I'm here." Ethan didn't smile. He simply opened a folder and slid it across the table. Inside were stills from gate footage, cabin audio transcripts, and internal crew logs. "You were right," he said. "We have pattern confirmation on Lena M. This is the 3rd unprompted reassignment involving black female passengers in the past 10 days. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Elsewhere in the airport, phones started pinging. Someone had uploaded a short video, a quiet clip. Grainy, but clear. Naomi walking past first class toward 14C. A young woman's voice narrating in a whisper. She didn't complain. She just moved. But something about it felt wrong. The caption. They told her to move. She built the system that's now watching them do it. It began spreading before Naomi even left the room. At Virejet HQ, panic had taken root. Jillian Rudd stood in the corner of the executive floor, watching as live sentiment reports surged red. Social media was spiking. Mentions of AO Equiscan were trending. So was Tower Row 14C. One post had already hit 200,000 views. Naomi Prescott moved without a word. Now 3 airlines are watching themselves burn quietly. A second one, simpler. You don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to make the system listen. By evening, news desks were stirring. A producer at a major network forwarded a message to editorial. Look into the Virejet flight incident at JFK. Naomi Prescott was the passenger. She's not just any passenger. Another reporter typed a tweet that went viral. Remember the name Naomi Prescott. She sat in 14C so the industry could finally stand trial. And yet, back in the quiet lounge at JFK, Naomi stood slowly and gathered her things. Ethan looked up from his notes. We'll be opening a formal review. You don't need to speak further unless you want to. Naomi met his gaze. I didn't come here to talk. I came here to show what the system refuses to admit. He nodded, understood. As she left, the hallway echoed behind her, not with applause, but with the sound of people waking up, because whispers had become words, and words were becoming movement. It was nearly midnight when Dr. Naomi Prescott reached her hotel room in the Lower East Side. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't unpack. She just sat at the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her knees. In the silence, the weight of the day pressed in soft but heavy. She took a breath, pulled her tablet from her bag, and opened the Equiscan dashboard. The screen flickered softly in the dim light. Live ethics feedback. Feed flight, 418 review, score 7.9. Flagged yes status. Escalated public sentiment. Trend rising. New user submissions. 14. 382. Most common phrase. I thought I imagined it. Naomi stared at that last line for a long time. I thought I imagined it. She had too. So many times. That business trip to San Diego when her upgraded boarding pass mysteriously reverted at the gate. The regional flight from St. Louis, where the attendant insisted she had no meal selection on file, only to later offer a gourmet tray to the white consultant seated beside her. The international flight where she was asked, twice, if she was in the right cabin. Each time, it was subtle. Each time, it was a mistake. Each time, she told herself not to make it a thing. Until the day it happened to her mother. Naomi was 26, fresh out of her first fellowship, taking her mother on a weekend getaway to celebrate. They had arrived early, booked first class, window and aisle, and then at the counter, just before boarding. An agent smiled and said, "Something's shifted. We've had to reseat one of you. Only one." Her mother had offered, "It's fine. I'll go." Naomi remembered watching her mother walk to row 23, alone, the woman who raised her, the woman who never flew anywhere, who never asked for anything, who once said, "Baby, sometimes they don't see you until they want your seat." Naomi never forgot that. That was the night she opened her laptop and began writing the first line of code that would become Equiscan. Not to expose people, but to protect the moments no one else would record. Back in the hotel room, Naomi scrolled through the live feed. Dozens of new entries. They always said the system was neutral, but somehow I kept getting moved. Thank you, whoever you are. I thought it was just me. Why do I feel more seen by code than by people? Naomi paused on that one, then clicked reply under her administrative panel. She typed, "Because sometimes dignity needs a structure, and sometimes silence needs a signal." She hit send and closed the dashboard. Outside the window, the city pulsed, indifferent, loud, alive. Naomi didn't need to be part of it. She just needed to make sure that tomorrow, someone else like her wouldn't have to sit in 14C and wonder if they belonged. She picked up her journal, turned to a fresh page, and wrote, "The system doesn't just need truth, it needs memory." Because without memory, injustice always looks like a mistake. And she had built Equiscan to remember. The 48th floor of Virejet's Manhattan Tower was designed for calm, soundproofed walls, glass that muted the city, recessed lighting with soft tones calibrated for clarity, but tonight, none of it worked. The boardroom was tense. Coffee cups trembled slightly against the polished oak table as news alerts buzzed in one after another. CEO Harold Mercer, a man who built his reputation on shareholder confidence and lobby deals, stood at the head of the table. Jaw clenched, tie loosened. Across from him, Jillian Rudd, Director of Compliance, didn't blink. "We're bleeding out on 3 fronts," she said. "Voice even, PR, policy, and trust." Mercer snapped, "Don't bring me metaphors, bring me control." Jillian slid a tablet across the table. "Then you should see this." The screen lit up with Equiscan's public dashboard. Live carrier ethics score. Virejet 68.2. Red ethics violation flight. 418 reassignment pattern. Confirmed passenger doctor. Naomi Prescott social mentions. 482, 300 plus. Trending hashtags. Nor row 14C, more Equiscan. "You moved." Her Mercer's eyes darkened. "You mean to tell me she wasn't just some activist with a platform? She built the damn platform." Jillian didn't answer. She didn't need to. Further down the table, Martin Kell, VP of Operations, tried to recover. She didn't go to the press. We could still reframe it. Jillian turned toward him, sharp. She didn't need to go to the press. Her data did. A moment of silence. Then the head of investor relations raised her phone. Our Capital's general counsel just emailed. They want clarification on Viajet's ethics compliance within the next 12 hours or they begin divesting. Another voice. 4 hedge funds are watching. One's already pulling out of our Q4 growth bid. And then the sentence no CEO ever wants to hear Denver International is considering halting our gate expansion unless we meet Equiscan's minimum compliance rating. Mercer's face twitched. They're letting a software score dictate landing rights. Jillian stared back. They're letting trust dictate access. And right now, we have none. Meanwhile, on the 12th floor, the media relations team was drowning. One intern turned to her supervisor, pale. CNN just pushed a story passenger quietly reassigned, industry quietly imploding, and ABC's morning segment is titled, The Seat That Started a Reckoning. Her voice cracked. Sir, people are uploading boarding passes now. One woman matched 6 prior seat downgrades, all following the same pattern. The supervisor swallowed. Get legal on the line and tell them, we're going to need a public statement. Back in the executive suite, Mercer walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and stared at the skyline. This wasn't turbulence anymore. It was structural failure. He could feel it in the silence of the boardroom, the way no one interrupted anymore. Viajet had spent years building premium lounges, gold member exclusives, corporate client perks, but no one had thought to build a firewall for ethics. Now a woman he'd never met, sitting quietly in row 14C, had grounded the trust his airline took for granted. He turned to Jillian, voice lower now. What do we do? She didn't answer right away. Then we don't spin this, we don't dodge it, we don't buy our way around it. Pause. We face it. Mercer blinked. And if we don't, her answer was simple, then we're the next crash. And it won't be mechanical. The Rayburn House office building in Washington, D.C., had seen its share of scandal. But on this particular Thursday morning, the hall outside room 2416 was unusually silent. No protesters, no reporters shouting questions, just a slow current of aides, congressional staffers, and Department of Transportation officials moving with purpose. Inside, the Subcommittee on Transportation Ethics had convened a special session. The subject line was plain independent oversight and bias in commercial aviation. The room was spare. No fanfare. No broadcast cameras. Just C-SPAN, 2 microphones, and a long crescent desk lined with 7 members of Congress. At the front, seated alone at the witness table, was Dr. Naomi Prescott. Dark blazer, unadorned folder, calm posture, no entourage, no lawyer, just her. A lone figure who had somehow without campaign, without headlines, pushed the entire airline industry into quiet chaos. Congresswoman Valerie Hightower, chair of the subcommittee, tapped her mic. This hearing will come to order. She turned toward Naomi. Dr. Prescott, we understand you were recently involved in an in-flight reassignment incident involving Viajet Airways, subsequently leading to a compliance escalation under the Equiscan protocol, which you architected. Naomi nodded once. Yes, ma'am. You may proceed with your opening statement. Naomi didn't read from notes. She didn't clear her throat. She simply began. I will not speak to feelings. I will speak to patterns. Her voice was quiet, but clear. In the last 60 days. Equiscan logged over 11,400 verifiable passenger reassignment reports across 7 major carriers. 84% of them disproportionately impacted Black passengers. 92% of those reassignments occurred without explanation, documentation, or compensation. In 73% of those cases, the seat was reassigned to a white passenger flagged as a priority flyer, often without purchase records. She paused. The room was still. These are not clerical errors. These are structural preferences, dressed up in protocol. One representative leaned forward, skeptical. Dr. Prescott, some would argue your system is invasive, that it watches people, not processes. Naomi met his gaze. Equiscan doesn't watch people. It watches patterns of power. It doesn't care about race or gender until the system does. And when it does, it leaves a trail. Equiscan follows that trail and holds the door open. Another voice from the dais. And what do you want us to do with this? Naomi opened her folder. She slid a printed boarding pass across the table. This is mine. Virejet 418. Purchased 4 weeks in advance. Seat 2A. Reassigned at the gate. No explanation, no apology. A man with no confirmed booking sat in my place while I sat in row 14C. She looked up. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I moved. But Equiscan didn't. It stayed in the seat. One congressman cleared his throat. This is personal for you, isn't it? Naomi replied, softly. It's personal for thousands. I just gave them the mirror. What they choose to see is up to you now. In the gallery, several quiet passengers watched from the back. One of them, a woman in her 60s, held a photo in her lap. A boarding pass from last year, circled in red ink, row 3 to row 17. No reason ever given. Her hands trembled slightly, but she smiled. Outside the hearing room, the whispers had already begun. She didn't raise her voice, but the system did. That woman in row 14C just rewrote the rules. And far above it all, somewhere in a Virejet terminal on the other side of the country, a young gate agent hesitated with an override screen open. Her finger hovered. Then she closed the window. No reassignment. Not this time. The clip from Naomi's congressional testimony had gone viral, but not in the way most things do. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't angry. It didn't trend for a day and disappear. Instead, it lingered. Played late at night on radio programs. Quoted in essays. Printed out and taped to break room walls in places no journalist would ever think to look: train stations, hospital lounges, school staff rooms, and most of all, airports. In Terminal C of Dulles International, a janitor named Mr. Langston taped a printout beside the employee lockers. The system doesn't just need truth, it needs memory. Dr. Naomi Prescott. His coworkers said nothing, but over the next week, gate agents began double-checking reassignment flags more carefully. More than once. Someone closed the override window before pressing send. In South Carolina, a high school student named Bria Thomas wrote a college admissions essay titled Row 14C. She didn't know Naomi personally, but she knew what it meant to be asked to wait a little longer, while someone else stepped forward. She ended her essay with the line, "Sometimes you don't need to scream, you just need to stay in your seat." Oh, in Chicago, a former pilot posted a blog entry called "The Woman Who Grounded the Sky," recounting all the subtle discrimination he'd seen and allowed over 2 decades. He admitted I let it happen, and the silence paid my mortgage. But Dr. Prescott made me wish I had done one thing right, when I could have. The post was shared over 600,000 times. And in Los Angeles, a father watched the hearing replay with his teenage son. When it ended, the boy asked, she didn't yell. Why did they listen? The father replied, after a long pause, because for once, the silence wasn't hers. Meanwhile, Naomi stayed quiet. No interviews, no speeches, no social media threads. She simply kept working responding to Equiscan flags, helping regulators frame the next ethics audit standards, and building a version of the system meant for hospital triage, public housing, and university admissions. Because seats aren't just on airplanes, they're everywhere. And all over the country, one subtle moment at a time, things started to change. Not from fear, but from memory. Not because Naomi Prescott fought for attention, but because she built a mirror and held it steady. It had been 6 months. 6 months since Flight 418. 6 months since Row 14C. 6 months since the world looked away. And one woman quietly refused to disappear. Now, Dr. Naomi Prescott stood once again at a boarding gate. Same airport, different airline, no fanfare, just a morning sun stretching across the terminal glass and the warm hum of people on the move. Gate C11 boarding for Flight 822 to Boston. She waited in line like everyone else. No one stopped her. No one glanced at her boarding pass twice. No one told her to step aside for a moment. Just a standard welcome aboard, Dr. Prescott. It felt almost strange to be treated as though she simply belonged. She took her seat 2A, not as a statement, not to prove anything, just because that was the seat she booked. And this time, no override screen flickered behind the gate desk, no whispered conversation, no gate agent looking unsure, just a beep, a green light, a nod, and then the world moved forward. Across the aisle, a flight attendant leaned down softly. Dr. Prescott, just wanted to say thank you. Naomi offered a warm, quiet smile. For what? For making us look again and listen again, even when no one thought they had to. Naomi nodded, then looked back out the window. Daitimos. As the plane taxied, she let herself breathe. Not just because of the flight, but because something had shifted. Not just policy, not just headlines, but something more difficult. Assumption, default, invisibility. And once those things begin to change, even slowly, you realize how heavy they'd been to carry all along. And in a small home in Detroit, a mother helped her daughter pack for her first solo flight. Before zipping up the suitcase, she tucked in a card. On it was a quote, handwritten in neat pen. Don't give up your seat. And if they take it, remember, you are not alone anymore. And pooh. Oh. In an aviation boardroom in Seattle, executives voted unanimously to require Equiscan compliance reports across all future domestic flights. One of them paused before signing the measure and said, "She didn't burn us down. She just held up a mirror and waited." And back in the sky, 37,000 feet above, Naomi closed her eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to feel the weight of belonging. This time, not earned by silence or sacrifice, just granted, as it always should have been. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. She didn't demand the spotlight. She just didn't give up. When they moved her from seat 2A to 14C without explanation, they didn't just steal her comfort. They tried to erase her place. But what they didn't know was this. That woman was building a system that watches the watchers. And now airlines listen. Gate agents hesitate. And passengers across the country hold their tickets a little tighter, knowing that someone is watching for them too. This is more than a story about a flight. It's a mirror held up to the systems we walk through everyday schools, hospitals, boardrooms asking the same quiet question. Who do we still think doesn't belong here? And maybe, just maybe, because of women like Naomi Prescott, we'll start answering differently. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Let's keep holding the mirror together. We'll see you in the next one.